Today's date is October 12th, 2006. The interview is being conducted in the video studio of the Alkalani's Adult Center in Rossmoor, Walnut Creek, California. The person being interviewed is George P. Blazin, whose date of birth is March 27th, 1919, and whose current address is 4781 Ewing Road, Castro Valley, California. The interviewer is Gerald Prebot, a member of the Veterans History Project of Rossmoor. The camera operator is Norm Gorsuch, a member of the Video Club of Rossmoor. The veteran served in the Army during World War II and attained the rank of First Sergeant. He served in the European Theater with the 90th, 104th, and mostly with the 106th Infantry Division. His dates of service were January 1942 until October 16th, 1945. George, we're glad to have you being interviewed. Let's start off, after you were born in Ewing, tell us briefly where you went to school and how you got into the military.
Well, I went to school in Ziegler, Illinois, and I graduated out of high school, and I came to California in 1937. And then in 1942, in January, I was drafted into the Army, and I was sent to Camp Roberts.
Which is in California?
Camp Roberts, California, for my basic training. Our group was one of the first groups to go into a 13-week training period. Usually when you're a recruit, you go for 17 weeks, but they cut 4 weeks off. I guess they needed more troops much sooner than they thought they would.
Then what happened after Camp Roberts? Where did you go next?
From Camp Roberts, I went to Camp Barkley, Texas, and there I was in the 90th Division. And there at one time I was called by the battery commander to go to the intelligence department of the division. And while there, I was given a name and a phone number to call, and I was used in the intelligence department in case when I went on pass or anything, if I saw anything out of line, I was to report it into this special number and not to use my name at any time. At that time, they told me that nobody in the battery would know anything about that, not even my battery commander. And if he was to ask me why I was sent to headquarters, that I was to call them immediately. That he had orders he was not to ask any questions about this visit there. Just before the visit, my parents, I got a letter from them, and they says there's somebody, 2 men, coming to the neighborhood checking with the neighbors about me and everything, and they wanted to know if I was in trouble or anything. And I guess it must have had something to do with this assignment I got with the intelligence department there.
It was probably a security clearance review that they were going through.
Probably. I really don't know. I was surprised because at my age that was very unusual. Any of that was all so new. But,
so you were kind of the undercover cop.
I guess you'd say that.
Now, how old were you then?
Well, at that time, I would have been about 23 years old. Well, an old man, actually, for as far as your troops are concerned, because most of them were like 18 or 19 years old. So
right.
They look at you like you're an old man anyway.
So you were a private first class then?
At that time, in in Camp Barkley, I was a private first
All right.
class. And right after that, I was promoted to a staff sergeant working in the supply room.
Now, before we go on, you have this picture of this very handsome young man.
Oh.
Would you show it, please, to the
Sure.
camera? Okay, hold it up a little higher. That's good. And this is you in your enlisted uniform.
Yes.
Very handsome, good-looking young man.
Oh, thank you.
Right. Okay, thank you for showing that. Now, after you being stationed in Texas, where did you go then?
Then I got transferred or sent to Camp Barkley. Let's see, I was in Camp Barkley, Texas at that. From there, they made 2 cadres, and they put 2 first sergeants, 2 staff sergeants, all the ranks, and they called them A and B. And then they drew the thing A or B, and A stayed at one place, and B went to Camp Adair, Oregon, and I happened to be in the one that went to Camp Adair, Oregon.
Okay, and tell me what kind of training you got in Oregon.
Well, in Oregon, we were just waiting for new recruits because they were forming a new division there. And one thing about the people in Oregon, they were very, very friendly when we first got there. They would invite you out to dinner and everything, and they were a really wonderful group of people there in Oregon.
Now, you mentioned something about desert training. Was that in Oregon?
When we were in Oregon, after we got our troops and that, we went to Eastern Oregon, which is pretty much a desert area. And after that, we went down around Yuma, Arizona. And there we were really getting desert training. They'd give you a canteen of water, had to last for all day. And if you shaved, usually we shaved with the coffee that was left over to save the water. But it was real training because they figured we would be sent to an area in a desert area.
Probably North Africa.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what they were figuring on.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you had some sort of a rather difficult or unpleasant incident. Now, was this in Oregon?
No,
that
this
came later?
was when I got transferred to Colorado Springs then, into the 106th Division then.
All right. Do you
And-
want to tell about that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
When I was in Colorado Springs, this was an outfit that was made up of a lot of Southern people, and the officers were Southern. And they were people that didn't like African American people. And while we were there on a maneuver, 2 African American truck drivers brought us our supplies, and they brought them real late at night, and I was doing other work, and I asked them, I said, have you had anything to eat yet? And they said, no, we haven't. So I said, I'll get the sergeant and have him fix you up something to eat. So I got the sergeant and had him fix something to eat, and I went on about my business, and our captain came up and he looked at the mess sergeant. He said, who told you to feed these African Americans? And he said, well, the first sergeant told me to. Well, I don't want you feeding them. And I want you 2 to dump your food into the garbage and get out of here. He used some other words with it. But
I understand.
and so they left. And then he came to me and he gave me instructions. He said, don't you ever feed an African American in my outfit as long as I'm the battery commander.
And it's unfortunate there was so much prejudice in the Army in those days.
There really was. It ended up, he hated Northern people just as much as he hated the African Americans. It didn't matter that you were white. He hated them. He was very bitter. You just can't believe it. And eventually, when we go on,
Yes, go ahead.
he demoted me to a private. And it was that instant, and he had demoted sergeants and that in the outfit. They were from the north before and everything. Well, my family, they wrote so many letters to Senator Downing, was a senator from California then, and they assigned a Captain Maddox to represent me. An order, he said, came from Eisenhower. I guess there was a lot. They wrote to the president and everyone, and said that they had to have a court-martial. In them days, a non-commissioned officer, a battery commander, and that could demote you without a court-martial. Well, at the court-martial, this Captain Maddox had so many of the Northerners in that on the witness stand. And he told me, of course, I never got a copy of it, but he told me that the board recommended that I get my stripes back and that the captain be decommissioned and put in as a private. I mean, is that obvious, you know? And something I didn't say, they tell me that he ended up the first day of the battle getting shot in the butt.
Uh-oh.
But you can mark that up.
Right. Well, I'm glad you told us this story because it really reflects the real world situation in those days, and it's unfortunate, but it's really what happened. Now, what kind of training did you get in Colorado Springs?
Well, in Colorado Springs, we were just really getting ready and getting our guns and all our equipment. We were just getting it ready for overseas. And then I'll go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Then our unit went to Camp Atterbury, Indiana.
Yes.
And then from Camp Atterbury, Indiana, we went to Boston, port of debarkation.
Right.
And we ended up in England.
Where in England did you go to?
I'm not sure, but it was pretty close to London.
Okay.
And there on our first day, we got a pass to go into town. Before we went to town, they showed a film special of what the African Americans were doing in the war. So there must be many others that have had to see that film just to show, because of the feeling in the service with the African American people.
Right.
You know, and I went to a dance, and there all the dances was a tag dance, and one of the African American men that were stationed in England tagged one of the men, and the fight started. And in England, the white young ladies didn't think nothing about, well, it's similar to what it is now in the
Yes.
United States. I mean, it's acceptable, and they're nice people. I worked with them for years, all the time, you know.
Well, very good. For the record, do you remember what year you went to England?
It would have been in
1944, perhaps?
44, yeah,
All right.
1944.
Okay.
I don't remember the month.
Well, that's all right. And you were with the 106th Division, and you're with the artillery
part of the infantry division.
Right. Did you get artillery training in England?
No, we had all that at Camp Roberts and various places in the United States. Yeah.
Now, obviously, you were preparing for the invasion of France and Germany.
No, they were already invaded.
Oh, they
I
were.
mean, yeah, when we landed, want me to go on?
Yes,
when we
please.
landed in England, I think it was Le Havre. I mean, in France.
Yes.
The Americans had already pushed the Germans way back, so we just came into France, and then we start going towards the front lines, which was right near Germany already by then.
And can you tell us what your division's assignment was? What were
Well,
you supposed to accomplish?
When we got there, there was a division that had been in this particular area, in a very quiet area, and So they figured, well, we'll take this seasoned division, and they thought they knew the Germans were going to put on a big push, that they were getting their tanks ready and everything, but they didn't know where for sure. And they thought it was north of where we were at. So they took this seasoned division out and put our outfit in there, which was a brand new outfit and with no actual combat at all. And I'd have to say, I guess the Germans had better intelligence than we did, because they knew it was a green outfit when they made the push, and they made the push on the 106th Division, and it was wiped out, in hours.
Now, you told me, am I remembering this correct, that this was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge?
That was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, and it was in the papers and everything. But one thing I want to say about the 106th Division, they didn't run.
Good.
They fought, and their losses were so great. There were all kinds of statistics out. You know, you hear all kinds, but I would say 70 to 75% were gone from the division. The division is seemed like about 40,000 men. And when the push started, it started just before dawn, and by dawn the Tiger tanks was back at the artillery where we were at. And we were in a wooded area, and 2 of the Tiger tanks came out, and we got both of them. And
Your artillery
and then we
battery
sat there
did.
the rest of the day. There wasn't much action. I guess they couldn't pull back. The tanks were just sitting there. A 105 shell will penetrate them. A 75 millimeter won't. You have to have a armor piercing type,
Right.
you know.
You had mentioned to me that you were running very, very short of ammunition. Can you
Well,
tell us about that?
Yes, when we got there, they gave us 125 rounds of artillery shells for our 105s, and for each gun. Well, 125 rounds, when it started and you start shooting, you almost shoot them. You could shoot them out in a half an hour, you know. So they just figured the Germans weren't coming there. So there was no need of having all that ammunition there. They were taking it to other places, but that's why. Well, I'm not saying that's why they moved so fast through the unit. They just had everything there. It wasn't that the unit was green or anything. I mean, the men that stayed there, they were just wonderful, you know.
Now, you were a first sergeant again at this time?
No, I was still a private.
Oh, still
but,
a private. But I understand you...
But in this, that morning when it started, why, I was in a different battery because of being demoted. And the first sergeant was an old-time Army man, and they said he started shooting. We had little shacks there and everything that we took over. Started shooting through the ceiling, and they had to send him back. So they let me take over to kind of supervise what we had left. We were down to 2 artillery pieces. We had 4 to start with, and then we were down to 2. We were there all day that night, but the Germans had surrounded, and we had no contact with any other of our batteries. There's battery A, B, C, then service and headquarters battery, and we had no contact with each other. I mean, we were completely just gone, you know.
How did you get out of that trap?
But we were able to get what trucks we had, and we were ordered out of there. After we did get communications afterward, we were ordered to pull back, and so we pulled back, and we went on so many different roads, and everywhere we went, there was so much confusion that the Germans were around us, and we were around the Germans. They just moved so fast, and so many units weren't hit. So they were surrounded as much in a way as we were. Really a lot of confusion in there, you know.
But it must have ended well because we did win. What finally happened to...
Well, one place I remember very well is the crossroads that they say had been taken around a dozen times. The Germans took it, and then the Americans took it, and the Germans took it, and the English came back and took it. And we were at this crossroad, and this was about 5 days before Christmas we were there. We had one piece by this time. We had some 82nd Airborne men. I mean, there were men from different units. They couldn't even get back. It was really confusing, you know. We had, from an armored division, we had 2 half-tracks, and they have 4 50 caliber machine guns on them. And at this crossroad, I didn't tell you this before, but I'll tell it now. There was a young officer came up, and he talked to me, and he said, "Now, Sergeant, I want you to move this artillery piece over here, right near the crossroad." And it was out in the open. I said, "Lieutenant."
Was this in France? Still in France?
Yeah, this was, and I says, "Lieutenant, that's putting them right out in the open. There's sharpshooters out there everywhere." I said, "You know, you got that bar on your helmet here." And I said, "You should have scraped that off." And he said, "Let me tell you something, Sergeant. I'm a commissioned officer. I want the men to respect me, and I'm not afraid to wear the bars. If you're afraid to wear your stripes, that's up to you. I'll show you where I want the gun." And I said, "Yes, sir, I got a sergeant with me." And we start walking up there, and all at once we heard zing, like something hitting a cannon. We all went down. And, "Are you okay, Sergeant?" "Yeah." "Are you okay, Lieutenant?" "Are you okay, Lieutenant?" Turned him over, shot right through.
Right through the bar. Well, that's a sad story, but a very real-life story.
Then we had these armored units, and I says, "Look, you go down that highway, you only go so far, and you start spraying. Boy, that thing puts them shells out so fast you can't believe it." Just figured it was from a tree. And of course we were completely surrounded at that time. And they went up and down, went so far and came back, and they made 2 trips, and I don't know if we scared it away or what, because we didn't worry from that end anymore. But then that night we had our forward observer officer was up, and he said, "There's a small company of German troops coming up to the crossroad." He says, "I want you to hold your fire." We had a wire just close, you know, and "Hold your fire until I tell you to start shooting." And he said, "Hold your fire, hold your fire." And they were singing. Getting near Christmas, they didn't know anyone was there because their troops were all around. They didn't know this pocket was in there. When they came up, they said, "Open fire." And men in multiple 50s on the road and everything. And they ran everywhere. And one of them ran, he must have been a private, I don't know, ran into a barbed wire fence, and he was hooked. It was nighttime, around midnight. And if I hear a calf mowing for its mother,
yes,
that's what he sounded like. And an officer would holler back at him in German. And I was told later what he was saying: "Shut up, you baby." And then nobody would get out of their foxhole. I mean, you'd get shot by your own people, down in the hole. And when it came daylight, we went and rounded them up. And this one young man, his face, there was no skin. The meat was just pulsing. I mean, it's really sad.
It's the
They
real
were giving
horrors
him,
of war.
they were giving him morphine, and,
Yeah.
and he was in that much pain. And of course, the officer, we had him. You couldn't take him anywhere because we couldn't get back. You couldn't take prisoners back, you know. So it was really sad. I mean, that's something.
It's the horrors of war. Now, did you get a combat injury during that battle?
During that time.
Would you show us your medals, George?
Oh.
Okay, here's your Purple Heart.
This is. Oh, okay.
Now that's the Purple Heart.
Yeah, that's
what
the
kind of injury did
Purple
you
Heart.
receive?
I was shot in the leg, and it got infected afterwards because I didn't go back for treatment, and you couldn't get back really.
Yes.
So,
Okay, well you certainly earned that. And then would you show us your other medals?
and then here I have the Bronze Star and the European thing, and you know, one thing about getting the medals, you know, not to be political or anything, when they said that Kerry didn't deserve it, you don't know who writes you up, I'll tell you. I don't know how this ever got written up, even on getting shrapnel into my leg, you know. But I would never say anything to anyone that got a medal and try to make them look like they didn't deserve it. I don't think you can get it in the Army, you know.
It certainly sounds like you deserved it from the story that you told.
Well,
but tell us what happened after the Battle of the Bulge. Did you come back to the States, or what happened next?
well, after that, we went to a town just out of Karlsruhe, Germany, a small town, and they were going to, because the 106th hadn't been in combat very long, they were going to get recruits and make a division there again to send to the Pacific. And we went to this small town, and then the battery commander says, you go up to the Burgermeister and you get the homes for billets for your men. So I went up and talked to the Burgermeister, and we picked out the nicest homes, of course.
Naturally.
And we took so many homes all in a group, and put so many men in each home. And we told the Burgermeister, I think it was early in the morning, and we told him by 5 o'clock we want them out, and the only thing they could take is their clothing. We want the bedding to stay there, everything in the kitchen and everything. And I told the Burgermeister, I says, if the ladies want to come in and clean the houses, because they were nice homes, you know, and they were, I gotta say, nice people. Well, you know, I mean, you're fighting, but still, they're human beings, you know.
Right.
And I says, if they want to come, they can come during certain hours in the morning, 9 to 11 or something like that. And they can clean the house. If they don't want to, they don't have to come. It's up to them. And then during that time, we had kind of training and different things that we would do. And then we also, in that town, we took over this restaurant that was there and used it for our mess hall. And that's where we ate at, you know, and the mess cook and them slept in. They usually had buildings, right? Bedrooms and that right there, you know. And while we were there, then the war in the Pacific, they dropped the atomic bombs, and it was over. So then we started our trip back to the States, and
so this must have been about August 1945, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that was happening in 1945, and went back to Le Havre, and we got on a boat and came back to the States there. But let me give a little more.
Sure.
After about 30 years later, let's see, 30 years later, I went back to the town that we had. Them homes didn't look near as nice.
that was in Karlsruhe, Germany, right?
You know,
Yes.
but we went back there. I went up and saw the Burgermeister. It was a
Good.
different Burgermeister. And he was a little kid, and he said, yes, I remember you. And he very friendly, and he says, I can say one thing, your men never did anything to any of the civilians, because that was one thing I told him. I says, they're people, if you do anything, don't look to me for any help. If anything, you're going to pay for it. I says, we treat them like human beings, and we did. And he assigned a young lady, about 18 years old. She could speak good English, and he says, you take them anywhere they want to go. My brother and his wife, and my wife and I were there. Take them anywhere they want to go, and take them out to dinner, and that's to be on the city, wherever they want to go. So she took me up where the houses were, and I have pictures of it.
Yes.
And then she says, now where do you want to go and eat? And that restaurant
Same
was still
restaurant.
there. And I said, I'd like to go in there and eat. She said, but we have some real nice places. I said, but I'd still like to go there. And she said, well, tell me what you want. I'll have to go and tell them ahead of time. And they were real nice to me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. You had some good memories then. Now, you were discharged from the Army in October of 1945, right?
Right.
All right. What did you do after your military service?
Well, I worked for the railroad, and I had seniority when I was drafted. And according to the federal law, you got your job back with the same seniority, which I did. And I spent 38 years with the Southern Pacific Company in the operating department, and worked with the union a lot, worked with legal counsel a lot.
And what was your job for the railroad?
And I was the engine foreman, and then I was delegate to the convention.
Oh, very good.
And I was interviewed by Cornell University at the convention. And it's in their library, too, about my railroad experience.
Which is another whole story, but it certainly sounds like your military career was very interesting, and your stories about what happened during the war, I think, are very worthwhile to record in this interview. And George, I want to thank you for coming and speaking to us, and I'm sure the Library of Congress will appreciate having your story. So thank you again, George Blazin.
Okay, thank all of you.